So as I said, we're going to start looking at our oscillators in this video. So our oscillators are located up here, as we know, and we have 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. So you can see that 1 and 2 are identical here, and then 3 has some kind of variation to it. So first of all, we have the number of voices here. Now the first thing to say is for oscillators 1 and 2, we have virtual analog, wavetable, and FM modes that we can use. Now we're going to start off by looking at the virtual analog options. And these are identical for oscillators 1 and 2. Now, for all 3 of these modes, virtual analog, wavetable, and FM, we have some common controls that aren't going to change. And those are, first of all, semitone, so we can tune the oscillator. Double click to reset that. We have a fine tune, which is in cents. Then we have a detune amount. Now the detune amount and the spread amount, in fact, and the reset, these are related to our voices here. For each oscillator, we can have up to 32 stacked voices. Okay, so this is again a kind of unison control, but it's different to the unison control here, which allows us to actually change the overall patch and layer that up using 8 different voices. This is for each oscillator, we have a stacked effect of 32 voices, which is like a choir effect. If we had one person singing a note, that would sound very different to 32 people all singing the same note with slight variations. It gives you that kind of stacked chorusy style effect. So with 32 voices in, the detune now determines how far away these extra voices are going to be in pitch from the main oscillator. And we can do that in different ways that we're going to look at later. That menu corresponds to that. Now the spread allows us to spread this effect in the stereo field. So mono, and then totally stereo. And the reset control, that allows us to reset the phase of the voices so they start from the same point. It gives you that very crisp kind of attack. But I'd say for most applications, when you want to create a super saw kind of stacked effect, you're going to want to switch that off. Okay, so we know this is where we determine the number of voices. And actually, one thing I should say is when you're using June 3, sometimes you'll kind of be pulling your hair out, not being able to get any sound from it. And often it's because you don't have the voices up here. So for example, if we go to oscillator 2, it defaults to have no voices. So make sure if you don't get any sound, you actually have a number specified in here. So this is, as I said, the number of voices that we can specify here. And this control here determines the volume of those extra voices. So we can determine the kind of amount of thickness we're adding with the extra voices there. Okay, now as I said, we can change the way these voices are tuned essentially, and also change the way their amplitude is implemented. So let's have a look at these. Okay, now the first one, the default is linear. Now this tunes all the oscillators or all the extra voices around the center, and it's done equally. You can kind of see that there. Bring this up. We have that kind of equal spacing. Now the next one is non-linear. You can see this has a variation to it. This moves the extra voices closer to the center. So that's kind of a tighter tuning. Back to non-linear compared to linear. So non-linear is a bit tighter because it's closer to the actual main voice. That's a bit thick. I mean, it's subtle, but slight difference. Now the Gaussian mode, hope I'm saying that right, that gives you a Gaussian distribution on the volume of the oscillators. So you can see what it does visually there. So it kind of tails off some of the voices that are further away. It kind of makes it a bit smoother and a bit more subtle. Then we have alternate here. Now this lowers every other oscillator in volume. So you can hear it doesn't sound as thick. It's got more space in it. Random, this allows us to employ a random tuning for all the oscillators whenever a new key is played. Let's thicken this up a bit more. So that actually makes it sound kind of less thick essentially. Then we have the option of a perfect fifth. Now this means that every other extra oscillator voice is going to be pitched up 7 semitones or a fifth. Pretty cool. We then have the same, but this time we're going to be pitching these extra voices in a minor chord. Same here, but a major chord. And then we have the option to have a sub-oscillator. Now this means we're going to be pitching every other oscillator or extra voice down 12 semitones or an octave. You can kind of see visually what that's doing there. And then finally, the last option is the swarm option. Now this is a brand new mode for June 3, and you'll see that we have a new control which has been added here, which is rate. What this means is that in this new mode, each one of our extra voices in this stack has its own modulation applied individually. And we control the rate of modulation using this rate control. So you can hear that's much more static. And that has a bit more movement to it. And that's a seriously thick super saw. Really, really huge kind of stacked oscillator there. So that's the swarm mode. Now this waveform section down here, this allows us to actually choose the waveform that the oscillator is going to play. So we have the options of ramp up, ramp down. Let's have a listen to how these sound. Very similar, those two. Pulse. And then we have a triangle. Now you'll see that we have an extra control which has been added for the pulse wave, and that is pulse width modulation. So we can go from a square wave to a pulse wave, and that of course can be modulated too. Now finally, on the wavetable side of things, we have this sync option here, which is a classic sync oscillator effect, where we're basically syncing the oscillator to this control here in terms of pitch. So we get that trademark kind of sync oscillator effect. Very, very cool. And that is our virtual analog section of oscillators 1 and 2. So to recap, we have common controls here. Let's just actually reset our patch. That is semitone to tune by semitones, fine by cent. And then the detune and spread correspond to the number of voices. We can have up to 32. This is our kind of stacked unison effect. And the amount of volume we're going to apply to these extra voices is determined by this control here. And we can detune them by pushing them away from the center frequency and also spread them in the stereo field. Reset allows us to reset the phase of each one of those extra voices to create that really snappy attack, or switch it off for a softer attack. Now the tuning options here allow us to change the way these are tuned. We went through each one of these. Remember, we had that brand new one in June 3 as well, which applies separate individual modulation to each voice. And then finally, we had a look at the sync control, which is where we can sync the oscillator to this frequency dial here. So we have that kind of trademark sync oscillator effect where the pitch is being locked to this frequency dial here. Really, really cool. And of course, then we had a look at our waveform control here, where we can choose exactly what we're looking for in terms of kind of oscillator building block. Do we want to have a ramp up, a ramp down? Let's actually just put it back to one voice. So we get those different kind of raw waveforms to work with to create exactly the kind of sound you're looking to create. And that is our virtual analog section. Okay, so now we've covered our virtual analog options within June 3. In the next video, we're going to have a look at the wavetable synthesis section. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.